know. I can. Oh, hey. We have the power. Hi, everybody. So we got a little bit of time. I just thought I'd come out here. I love that you're wearing a first date shirt. That's fantastic. Everybody know that I'm doing a Broadway musical right now? Because I am. Wait, hold on. I want to be loved by you. Do you want to bring that in? We got props. We got props, everybody. Yeah. You want to know about rovers? We're telling you about rovers. Is that everything? I know. Keep bringing it. That's fine. Hey, what's up, girls? Team Unicorns in the house, looking all hot, looking all fly. Hey, oh, you guys are all beautiful people. Who's been to Nerd HQ before? Who's coming for the first time? Feel like I love it. Enthusiasm. Always appreciate that. So basically, some of you know, hopefully all of you will by the end of the weekend. This is all for you. This is all just about giving you guys some really cool, intimate access where for an hour you get to ask whatever you want. And we have no moderator. There's nobody. I mean, I'll be here on the stage, but I'll just be yucking up like everybody else. I will not tell you what to ask. I will not be asking questions. This is for you guys to hit Bobak and our other gentlemen and say, what's it like building a rover and sending it to another damn planet? That is, or whatever else you want to know about NASA or JPL. And there's a lot to know. And I cannot answer those things. I'm not nearly intelligent enough. So what we have, by the way, we don't have mics handing out any this year. We have mics planted all over along the stage and right above you. So when you have a question, and I'm sure everybody's got questions, because that's why we're here. Just raise your hand. You'll be picked on. If you do get picked on to ask a question, please stand and project so that everybody can hear that. Sound good? Yes. Does that sound good? That's very good. That's much better projection. See, we're practicing. We're practicing. Yes. Oh, yes. And is there flash photography allowed at this panel? No. Is there video allowed at this panel? No, I really mean it. I really mean that. Thank you for believing in us in that. And trust me, you can watch the very professional cameras video this later on. But you're here in the flesh, so you know, why do you need it? What else? Anything else? Am I forgetting anything else? Cell phones. Cell phones? Yeah, I mean, silence those. That would be respectful. Thank you. Yeah.
We'll empty out rows from the back.
What's that?
We'll empty out rows at the back.
What's that? Oh, yes. Oh, God, you're great. You've been here already. I love it. This is your third panel already? God bless you. I just so appreciate that. Yeah, so, and you guys will be row by row escorted out. So at the end of the panel, give them a giant warm round of applause and then just chill, talk to your neighbor, and we'll get to that. Hold on. What time is it? Is it that time?
2:44.
No. What? Mine says 2:45. You guys ready? I said, are you ready? All right, without any further ado, I really hope they're standing out there. Please welcome from NASA JPL, Bobak Ferdowsi, Fred Sarikio, and Rob Zimmerman. Warm round of applause, everybody.
Well, hello, everybody. We have how many of you guys watched The Landing? Yes. This is going to be boring for you, but we'll watch it anyway. Yeah, if you guys want to cue the first little bit here, we can show you guys a reminder of what happened almost a year ago in a couple days. Or I can describe it verbally. Okay, we can skip. This is the assembly of the rover. Actually, this is a time lapse. It's kind of cool. You can see us building this in our clean room over the course of, I think this was like 6 or 7 months. Yeah. Now everybody can see it, including us. But you can see different parts of the spacecraft being built. That in the front and center was the cruise station. Now it's all assembled into the kind of the final vehicle, and they're building the. I think the last part here is the final integration of everything all together. And then all this actually gets taken down flown to. This is all done at JPL in Pasadena. The next part is actually it takes it all the way down to Florida where we launch, and they reintegrate everything one more time before we take off. So if we skip to the next one, just a little reminder of landing night.
Things are looking good. Coming up on entry. Vehicle reports entry interface. At this time, we'll begin pressurizing the propulsion system to increase the thrust of the system. We'll use that for all the maneuvering in the atmosphere we're about to do.
Feel free to boo or applaud as you feel.
We're standing by for guided start. We are beginning to feel the atmosphere as we go in here. The vehicle has just reported via tones that it has started guided entry. At this time, the vehicle is beginning to steer its way to the target. We have seen peak deceleration. It is starting its first bank reversal. It is reporting that we are seeing G's on the order of 11 to 12 Earth G's. Bank reversal 2 is starting. We are now getting telemetry from Odyssey. We should have parachute deploy around Mach 1.7. The parachute is deployed. We are decelerating. Speed chill has separated where we found the ground. We're down to 90 meters per second at an altitude of 6.5 kilometers descending. Standing by for batch shell separation. We are in powered flight. We're at altitude of 1 kilometer descending. Standing by for sky crane. Sky crane is started.
Eagle Eyes, you remain strong.
Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars.
Got thumbnails.
Today, right now, the wheels of curiosity have begun to blaze the trail for human footprints on Mars. This is an amazing achievement. Our leadership is going to make this world better.
Well, today on Mars, history was made on Earth. The successful landing of Curiosity marks what is really an unprecedented technological tour de force. It will stand as an American point of pride far into the future. And if anybody has been harboring doubts about the status of U.S. leadership in space, well, there's a one-ton automobile-sized piece of American ingenuity and it's sitting on the surface of Mars right now, and it should certainly put any such doubts to rest.
Well, tonight was a great drama that was played. I could only think of the words of Teddy Roosevelt as I was sitting there. It is far better to dare mighty things even though we might fail, than to stay in a twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat.
can honestly say, guys, that I actually get nervous in that video still. Like, I've seen it dozens of times, but honestly, like, there are moments like when the parachute, I'm like, it's not gonna happen this time. It's a relief every time it works, honestly. I don't know about you guys.
I can say when we actually did it, I remember even after we got the touchdown confirmed, and there's even the picture up on the screen, and I'm like, oh, just wait, that doesn't seem right, yeah.
I get goosebumps every time. I don't know if it's the music or if it's just the flashbacks to the nightmares of everything that could have gone wrong that night, but I'm glad that it worked well, and it was a lot of work from a lot of people for a long time to make that come off.
Yeah, so true. I put together a couple more slides. I don't know, they're just pictures of the first couple events that have happened since we landed. I don't know if here's one. So this is us right after we landed, basically showing the burn marks on the surface of Mars from our rocket engines. Nothing like a little rocket power jetpack to make things cool. The next one here, that's our self-portrait. We do a little selfie here. It's pretty great. What you're missing is the arm. So we do this, we have a camera.
Bobak took this picture.
I took this picture, yeah. I did. I practiced a lot in the mirror before so, I mean, basically for us, obviously, this is years of our lives. I worked on this for 9 years. Fred, you worked on this for
9 years as well.
And Rob, you've been on it for 4 years now?
4 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
They're relative young. He's young, guys. But I can say that. How about raise your hand if you sent commands to a spacecraft yesterday?
That's true, I did.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So, I mean, for us, it's just kind of a labor of love. I think it's an incredible feeling. It's kind of a family that you build over the years that you work together. And now we kind of, we're lucky because we could all hate each other had it not gone well. I would have definitely blamed Fred.
Well, part of the team was no one wanted to be their fault for the thing not working. There was not so much the blame, but they just didn't want to have the responsibility of that failure.
What a powerful motivator that is. I don't want to be the guy to mess it up for everybody else. I don't know about you guys, but who wants to be like, oh, cool, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't check that part before, my bad. So, yeah, I think that's actually, unfortunately, for better or worse, one of the big motivators in these missions. And you're like, but it's also because we care about each other. I think, you work really hard, you know the effort everybody else is putting in, how hard everybody's been doing their job, and then you're like, you don't want to be the guy who then screws it up for them. And, I mean, in Fred's case, you have a family, so obviously there's some missed events and things like that while you work late nights. We have tests. We do a 24-hour testing even before we were landing. So.
And there was weeks spent in Florida testing the actual spacecraft. There was an anomaly during the testing, so it extended that to a few more weeks. So, yeah, everyone else plays a part. Your whole family's part of the team.
Rob has a cat, so I know that his...
Thanks again.
Yeah.
But he was affected too.
Yeah. So I mean, it's honestly, and actually, when you watch that video, a lot of the shots that you see, like of Caltech and things, are actually family and friends. It's interesting. I mean, each time I kind of watch it, I notice a few more people. I'm like, oh, that's so and so's wife or girlfriend or, thing like that.
That was actually one of the exciting things about this particular landing. Unlike the previous landings that weren't quite as televised and promoted as much, everyone who was there watching was feeling the intensity of the event as we were in the control room as well. And that once I saw this after landing and saw all the reactions of all the people who are watching all around the world, that's part of, it really inspired me, and I'm like, wow, they were feeling this too, so.
Yeah, it's pretty, I mean, it's very special, and I really, we were really lucky because, actually, everybody was really lucky because we were experiencing it in real time, and everybody in the world was really watching it at the same time we were. There's no, tape delay or anything like that. It's basically, if it had gone dark, you guys would have been like, seeing our faces, just panic. But yeah, but the crazy thing about this, and it's not brought up in that video, but is the fact that this is all happening basically in the past. We're waiting, it's a 14-minute delay from the signal from Mars to hit Earth. That's the speed of light between the two planets when we landed. So it's all already happened, and you're just waiting for the results. And that's what's crazy, because you're sitting there and, next to these guys, and you're like, oh, it's already one way or another on the surface of that planet.
And because of that delay, there was no way we could even affect the outcome. Once it hit the atmosphere, it was either going to work or not by the time it got to the ground. All of our testing and all the preparations were either going to work or not, and we're just sitting there waiting to hear the results.
Yeah. So Fred, maybe you guys want to talk about what you guys did on each part?
My job is attitude control, which is basically the spacecraft pointing. I got to work on the mission from cruise to EDL. That's basically when we launched, flying through space and correcting the trajectory as on our way from here to Mars. And it was also part of the EDL team working the navigation filter that basically figured out where we were along the way of the trajectory all the way to the ground. That was the parts that I worked
So
on.
even during that video and during the landing, the video that the kind of the simulation that you guys were seeing with the parachute deployed and everything else, that was real data that was coming back from the spacecraft that was based on kind of the work that Fred did, and it's feeding directly into that visualization that you guys can see. So there's actually like, what's happening as best we can approximate.
And there's at least a dozen events in there that if they didn't work, other parts of the mission couldn't even continue on, and the whole thing would have just crashed to the ground. So I was definitely feeling the intensity of that night.
Yeah, we try to put redundancy. So, Rob, why don't you tell them what you guys, because I think part of your redundancy is your thing during landing.
Yeah, so I did a couple things. I did a lot of work on validation and verification for the Pyrotechnics system. So this is system level, making sure that the right pyrotechnics go off at the same time. That's cable cutters, explosive bolts, things like that, all the separation events. So we didn't use any of that until landing. So that was pretty stressful for me, especially the week before, like Bobak said, making sure it's not my fault.
Rob was literally looking at pictures the week before
just
to make sure that each pyro was like, the arrow was pointing in the right direction, like this side up. We're like, oh, yeah, no, okay, it's good.
It's like, what are you gonna do? Well, I still want to know. But yeah, so that was pretty exciting for us watching all the pyrotechnic events happen. I also did a lot of, for cruise, which is the 9-month trip to Mars from Earth after launch. I worked on the power system. I did watched as the power data came down. Worked with the batteries, and then since landing, also worked with the power system, also done some of the generic engineering work when we put together engineering commands, things like working with heaters and updating files, that kind of stuff, and kind of just supporting the rest of the uplink team each sol as we send up commands. So I was actually working yesterday, and some of the commands that are running right now, we were doing last night.
It's crazy.
So, yeah.
So cool. So for myself, I was served as, during cruise and operations, served as the flight director for some period of that. I also did systems engineering like Rob. And then 9 years ago when I started, I was really just fresh out of school. So they had me doing a variety of tasks. I did mission planning, which is kind of like just sort of an overview of what the system is going to do once it's on the surface, working with instrument teams to understand how we're actually going to take science. And then eventually working on launch and cruise verification and validation, like what Rob did, a lot of the testing in our basically simulators that we have on Earth. Then operations from launch until today, and it's pretty fun. Fred, one of the things that I feel like is lost in all this, because I think most people are really excited about the landing, but I think the job of getting there and how accurately we did that is crazy hard.
Yeah, think of it like you're trying to shoot an arrow. That's how they think of trajectories and they try and describe it. And you're trying to shoot a target, but you have if you're a super ninja, and you can, along the way you see that it's not quite hitting the target in the right spot, you can stop it and push it in the right direction. From here to Mars, we only corrected the trajectory 5 times. And some of those were on the order of we changed, what we call it is delta V. That's saying we're going this direction at this speed. We want to go a little bit of delta velocity in that direction over here. And some of those were on the order of a few millimeters per second changes that we were putting in. And relative to Mars, we're going 5.5 kilometers a second. So we're going pretty fast. So a few millimeters per second difference will mean the difference between landing in the targets or not. And basically the error that we had on the surface was only a few hundred meters. And that's after the 350 million mile trip to Mars.
Yeah, I think the analogy, if I remember correctly, is something like a quarterback here throwing a ball to the receiver in Florida.
Right.
And hitting that mark.
And landing on home plate, but just off to the center of home plate. And we were aiming for the center of home plate.
Yeah. So I think that's amazing. And I mean, the whole team worked really hard to get it from launch to landing. And I mean, the landing is, of course, spectacularly Rube Goldberg.
In the previous missions for Spirit and Opportunity, I worked that one as well. There was one flash of an image for the cruise phase because they had this beautiful picture of launch and there was the sounds and the rockets. And then it was 9 months later. That's skipping over an entire 9-month job of an entire team of 50+ people, making sure that
ask a pregnant woman if you just want one picture during pregnancy.
That's a long 9 months.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Cruise often gets looked over. EDL is the glory. Luckily, I was able to work on both parts, because then I can explain the pain of cruise to everyone who says that EDL looked easy. And it wasn't easy, but it was a great day.
Luckily, that video is a lot more fun to watch than a birthing video. So Rob, I mean, yeah, you worked on this systems engineering and everything, power, but I think you have some cool stuff that you want to share.
Yeah.
We pass out.
Can we pass it around?
Yeah, pass it around. Pass that guy around.
So this this is a thermal battery. This is actually the model used on MER, which is Spirit and Opportunity. But the MSL ones are really similar. They're just a little larger, about twice the diameter. And so I'm going to pass it around. But what this is we use this during the landing sequence. We set off a charge inside. It gets really, really hot from a chemical reaction. And we use that as basically a current source to fire the rest of the pyros. So it stays hot for about 30 minutes or so, and sources enough current to set off all the pyros. So this is a one-time use battery for. So this one was actually used to test. I don't remember if it was Spirit or Opportunity, but one of them. And it was used, and you can see the scorch marks underneath the oxidation. It's kind of cool. So I'll pass this around. Please give it back. I'll know if I see it on eBay where it came from.
So I don't know, guys. I don't know if you guys have some questions or things. I mean, I can talk for a long time, but I'd love to hear what you guys want to hear about. Yeah, go for it. Just yell it out.
So we live in an age where there are a lot of superhero movies where you see people go in and like overnight just create things. But you said that it took about 9 years for you to do it. So when you started and like the whole process, did you have to kind of figure out where technology would be when you're ready to do it, or was it a constant change?
Some of the things were technology development where, like for the radar, for example, the thing that once the heat shield came off and we were looking at the ground, that radar didn't exist at the start of this mission. Different types of radars did, but that was one where we basically built that from scratch in order to meet the needs of this particular mission. Other stuff, you're using technology that exists today, and in 10 years, it's just out of date. In order to redo this mission, we have to make sure that some of these things that we want to buy, we buy them now, otherwise they'll be obsolete in 10 years from now.
Yeah, and so what Fred actually is hinting at here is we actually have a 2020 mission that's coming up that's going to reuse a lot of the Curiosity technology. And so we're looking at that. But one of the crazy things is, we started this drawing, 2003, 2004 was when it kind of came together sort of as what it looks like today. And then at that point, you have to procure like computers and things like that from 2004. But not only that, they have to be qualified for space. So it's not just that like, oh, I can get the top of the line processor in 2004. You have to get one that's been basically bombarded by radiation. You know that it's going to work on the way from Earth to Mars.
Another example of that is the parachute. We want this particular thing needed a big parachute because we're landing a lot of mass on the surface of Mars. So we're like, well, to test a parachute costs a lot of money. So what do? What was the last big parachute that we flew on Mars that was enough to basically do the job for Curiosity? And that was in Viking, which was 40 years ago. So we used that. And then we're like, well, we need a little bigger than that. So are we going to do the whole test program on that? Not really. We're going to basically build a bigger parachute and do the analysis to say those extra 3 meters we need can be qualified now. So you basically have to, some things were 40 years old and some things were as new as we can get them. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually, by the way, another cool fact. So during the video, you see that picture of a satellite orbiting and taking the picture. That's an actual picture taken by a satellite going overhead hundreds of miles an hour of a spacecraft that's plummeting down towards the surface at a couple hundred miles an hour. Which is, the fact that we can do that blows my mind.
And also, the last 4 minutes of data, when the rover landed, it was actually on the backside of Mars from our point of view. So the last 4 minutes of data were actually relayed through a satellite that was orbiting Mars and came back to Earth, and you're seeing it live.
We
and that's
do
pretty cool.
Things. And that parachute actually is the largest supersonic parachute, meaning faster than the speed of sound ever built. So.
And it was tested the first time on landing night.
That's right. Actually, that's one of the amazing things about landing night, guys, is that whole sequence of events never tested together at any point. People think, oh, you must have, no. We basically tested little parts of it here and there. We made sure the engines would work. We did small scale testing of the parachute. We did some large scale, but in the wrong environments testing of the parachute as well. And basically put that into a model that they could run, millions of times simulations. And then landing night was the first time everything actually got put together and run together. So that's part of the reason why I felt like throwing up a number of times. But it's incredible to think about that. And the folks who do these test plans and everything have to realize that, because doing a scale test on Earth of something like this is crazy challenging and therefore crazy expensive. And so you have to go up to hundreds of thousands of feet to get the same atmosphere as on Mars. You have to try to offload Earth gravity if you want to try to make it look kind of like weigh the same thing that it would, eventually on Mars. So it's not easy.
And any particular thing that may go wrong during that particular test, you'd have to either explain, well, that's a phenomenon only that's happening here on Earth and that we wouldn't see that on Mars. It could be an over-test, it might not be the right environment. Then you can spend years trying to describe and trying to understand why this particular test here failed when it may have nothing to do with what may fail on Mars.
Yeah.
So.
So good? Yeah.
Hey, I'm a huge fan of all these robotic exploratory missions, and I'd like to see them go out, much more frequently to all the different interesting places in the solar system.
So would we.
And of course, I'm sure money is the main object of doing that. So, is there anything like a Kickstarter for NASA?
We're gonna be passing a hat around later.
I mean, and also, yeah, there are advocate groups for NASA. There's Penny for NASA. There's Planetary Society. They do a lot of great work for us, and mostly lobbying government for more NASA funding. They're really the best thing that, as an individual, you can do is go through them, or talk to your own congressional members and people like that, and encourage them to keep funding NASA. Yeah, for better or worse, we are at the whim of government budgets and everything else. Yeah, unfortunately, no McDonald's sponsorships or anything are going to happen for us. It would be great. I would draw like a golden arches on the surface.
Yes.
Hi. I don't know if you knew all the information during MER. Spirit and Opportunity. Lisa Gaddis. Anyway, but I'm curious if your goal has stayed the same for things that you wanted to look at and explore on Mars, or if something has changed between MER.
Oh, between MER and Curiosity
and
and
where you're going with 2020, is the goal stay the same, or what are you looking to push towards?
The goals definitely changed because MER had a specific, basically, drive to follow the water, find the paths of water in the places it landed. Its science package wasn't as sophisticated at all as what Curiosity can do and look for. So I don't know if Bobak can talk about the science package that's on Curiosity now.
Yeah, I think so. We really have. I mean, what NASA's doing is kind of telling a story with Mars, and we started with. I mean, Viking was a very ambitious mission in the 70s. It actually tried to accomplish more than it really could, and so we had some experiments that had kind of false positives, or at least positives that we couldn't really bear out in the end. So starting with Pathfinder and MER, what we really were looking for is the water story. Was there water on Mars at some point? Because that's what we think life requires to survive. And MER basically said, which is 2004 landing, basically said yes. We find things here that had to be informed in the presence of water. 2007, we sent a polar lander called Phoenix. They scooped up some of the surface. They actually saw that there's still water ice on Mars. So at the poles, we know that there's still some water. And then the answer, or the question with Curiosity was, now that we know there's water, was that environment where the water existed habitable for life? So we're not looking directly for life, but we're like, hey, if life, can survive, what are the ingredients life needs to survive on? Were those there in the Martian history? And we chose a landing site where we saw that there was evidence of this, water flowing into this crater. And then basically we hit the interplanetary jackpot, which is that within a couple days of landing, we saw already key signs that things had been formed in the presence of water. We drilled into our first rock, and the first rock immediately told us, yes, there was water on Mars in the past. It was fresh water. Certain types of life, biology that we know here on Earth could survive in that environment. Which, I can't believe we did that immediately out of the gate, because it really makes the next couple of years kind of boring.
Yeah, we were. Someone said, "So we're done. We can go home." Yeah.
And then with now that we've sort of answered that question, 2020 is going to go on and say they're going to do a couple of things that are really unique. I think one is they're actually going to look now for that evidence of life directly, and you can do that when you basically once you learn a little bit about what was the environment like that life would have had to survive in. That's how you can start narrowing down the question to what kind of life would I be looking for at that point. If you think about trees versus us, if you're trying to look for just trees or you're looking for humans, you might have two different types of instruments. Cameras might not tell you that trees are alive if you just took one picture and you're like, I don't know if that's alive or not. But if you see movement, for example, it's different. So that's what we can do. And the other thing that 2020 thing is really cool is they're going to carry a little sample cache that we can store a sample on board for a sample return mission in the future. So we definitely have that kind of, we're working our way through the Mars thing.
But it's a tricky thing because you're doing an experiment to find one thing, and you see this other thing that may say, we only had this particular instrument, we could uncover that. And so then the next opportunity is 10 years away to basically go do that experiment. And by the time you get there, you may find a new question. And so that's why you need more of these missions that do incremental things to basically build up the picture over 20 or 30 years. Because we're not going back every 2 years for every opportunity that we can land on Mars. In the past, that was part of NASA's goal, the faster, better, cheaper thing. Every 2 years, there was going to be a mission to Mars. With a failure here and a failure there, then it's like, let's slow down, let's get it right, and do a little bit bigger each time. So it's an incremental step.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I thought, I may be incorrect, but I thought I read that the camera that's there is black and white and that you approximate the colors. Can you explain how that?
So there's a mix of cameras on Curiosity. There are black and white cameras. There's a couple. In the front and the back, we have HazCams for, I guess it stands for hazard camera. Those are black and white, and then nav cams on the master black and white. But the mass cam is color. I think you may be talking about MER in that case.
Yeah, so I think MER and Pathfinder used cameras, black and white cameras with color filters. And so what they would do is they would make a black and white image, put a little filter, and do like red, green, blue, and then we can make the color version of it on Earth. We're actually now, I mean, this is again part of the advancing technologies and things like that. We can now use chips, CCD chips, like in your digital camera. They are only 2 megapixels, so it's not that fancy. Again, this is the kind of thing that we're basically choosing technology in 2005 that's already space qualified, meaning it's from 2003. I mean, I like to joke, but honestly, the processing power of our rover is significantly less than any of you guys' phones right now.
That's true.
We have, I think it's a 133 megahertz processor, 128 megs of RAM, 2 gig, memory storage.
Yeah, during EDL, when we were trying to get all this data so that when we landed safely, we can get it back down, they were giving us grief for wanting to be able to store 64 megabytes of data.
Yeah.
This is a $2 billion experiment that we'll only get to do once, and we can use this to further. And we were crunched into 64 megabytes of space. So
to be fair, in 1976, right, with the Viking, they did it on 18K of memory. And it's like, and one of the things, it's like we used basically a PowerPC processor, like you would find in an iMac. They use like a Honeywell 2G processor with like 18K platinum resistance wire, and you're like, I don't even know what these things are, and they're basically custom built. So times have changed. I mean, the good thing is NASA, we can use some of the technologies that are available to people. Again, not necessarily the latest and greatest, but.
And your question also, so the mass cam is color. Molly, the hand lens imager, is also color. And Marty, the descent imager that you saw, that was actual footage of the landing. That is also color too. Yeah.
I'm a high school math teacher, and so I was wondering, like, what was it like for you in high school? Were you picked on, like, because I'm sure you were pretty smart, and I didn't know, like, did you do well? And then, like, now that you're making science and math and engineering and technology cool, like, what would your advice be for, like, high school students?
I will start to say I was not particularly the best student in high school. I'm very fortunate to have slowly improved with time. Math was not actually ever my strength. I mean, I was picked on in school, not so much for being nerdy, I think, as I had. I'm an Iranian American, so I had trouble in school mostly being an Iranian American, not for. I think for being nerdy. It probably helped that I wasn't particularly large and easier to pick on. But no, I don't think for being nerdy was that bad. And I gotta say, like, it just seems like it keeps getting better for nerds out there. I mean, like, you think about events like this, it's kind of awesome now.
Being good at math and science is now cool. It's the new Tony Stark thing to do. It's, they don't have this, maybe it's a different time back then. I was picked on, but it had nothing to do with being good at math or science. So. But just stick with whatever you want to do. I mean, whether it's math, science, or art, or history, or whatever your passion is, just do it.
And I can say, if you're asking for advice, I guess, when I went off to college, one thing that really helped me a lot is I joined a student team where we worked on small satellites, just doing something outside of your classwork. And some of my friends are out there. Just doing more than just going to class and showing up, and just get involved with something, get interested in something that you like. and you learn a ton of stuff just building anything.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, as a good example of that, I mean, Fred and I have also been involved in First Robotics, which is a program for high school students to build robots. There's actually other people, here. That's a great way of actually getting some hands-on things. And honestly, like, in all fairness, there's a lot of course, detailed math and science that goes into this. But I think learning the excitement for kind of asking questions and being interested in things and then building things is far more important than learning the actual science and math and details behind it at first. So for me, like I always say, like I think I was just a naturally curious kid, like playing with Legos. I mean, there's not a ton of, you don't need to know a ton of math or science to build Legos, but you get the sense. And then later, the excitement, you can learn how everything works and get the actual equations and everything else. But kind of getting that sense, for me, that was I think, what got me excited about science.
And if you feed the passion with these little robotics competitions, they're like, oh, if I can do better at this, if I learn these math and physics and dynamics and that sort of thing when I go off to college, that also feeds the passion and motivates them, And then as long as there's something that they like to do and they feel they can achieve it, they'll go off and learn on their own. That's the best type of learning. It's not necessarily, even in college, it's not the coursework that gets you. It's you do the coursework and okay, this is kind of good, but when you go off to school, even at JPL, my first week, I did well in college, but when I got there, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do now. It's like, and I did well, and I thought I was prepared, and I got there, and I'm like, okay, now I got to figure out, because it's not A plus B equals what? It's anything plus anything equals C, and you have to figure out what those two variables are. It's an open-ended problem, so it's eye-opening, but also like feeds your passion and makes you want to do it. So
actually, one of the things it's worth pointing out because I think it's really cool. Where we work, and I think people have this, it's changing slowly. This image of NASA and engineering is very stodgy. I don't think where we work is at all like that. And I would actually argue it's exactly what Fred is saying. There's so many different approaches to answering for example, just the how do you land on Mars thing. It takes a very creative type of person to come up with, I'm going to do this rocket-powered jetpack concept. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, is that no one at JPL is really just like, I only do math and I can't think outside the box. It's all about like encouraging the creativity and bringing the diversity of opinions and everything else. And I think that's kind of the fun thing, is that we have an environment now where people are encouraged to be a little different and think a little differently. And that's true for just about everything. I mean, not just NASA, but you talk about green power, you talk about world hunger problems. All these things require creative solutions, not just, hey, this is the way we've done it for 1,000 years. So I think it's cool. I think it's a great time to be an engineer or a scientist. I think it's a lot of fun. And I think that's the other thing that we can do, is share the excitement that we have for our jobs with people, so they realize you don't just have to be a musician or a sports ball player.
He was really cool in high school.
Yeah. Question over here.
First off, thank you guys for coming. This is really cool that you were like last minute. I bought my ticket on the plane. I know.
That's pretty amazing, by the way, that
Oh,
you can buy.
I know.
I mean, you can buy a ticket on an airplane nowadays.
I
It's
was
the internet.
a little geeking out happening on the plane. There was so much attention to the landing itself. I watched it from home. My son was with me. It was really cool. Cried with you guys a little bit.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know.
I was very manly that night.
True, the hair kind of stood out. Have you seen kind of an increase in the attention that the government is giving NASA and JPL and different programs, as far as offering more funding, being more willing to give you more funding, just because of the attention that now the public knows who you are, stops you in the street or something? Not that the government's really known for listening to people, but
Part of the future of the funding depended on this day. If this failed, it doesn't mean that we would have closed down. It would have meant much more difficult to get funding for the next 5 years. So part of the reason why we got one of the programs called Insight, which is like Phoenix, but done again, was because of that, and also for Mars 2020. The only thing is, it was either going to be a step function up or down on landing night. So that's also pressure.
I think we're kind of in a weird time, because of course there's the sequester going on, which is the government's trying to figure out how they're going to spend the money, and we're all battling for funds. So as a whole, NASA's funding is not necessarily looking as bright as it could be, or as I'd even like to be. But I think NASA's going to continue to do cool things with what we have. We'll make it work. that being said, I mean, I have to say, I you know, on a personal level, right, I do feel like the administration has asked me to go to certain functions like the White House Science Fair, and I mean, even the whole idea of having a White House Science Fair, which is pretty new.
Lucky.
I mean, I do think that means that they are interested and they're encouraging of these fields, and it's, you know, it's one step in the right direction. And hopefully, you know, the budget situation will get resolved and we'll keep doing cool things. But ultimately, I'm kind of hopeful. I feel generally like there's a positive trend and appreciate, not necessarily always at NASA, but in just the value that science can bring to the table in terms of, again, some of the challenges we're going to face.
Question over there?
I used to work at JPL as a teenager. Proud to have all my JPL paraphernalia, my flair. So I was just curious if you could say more about what drew you to work at JPL and a little bit about your background.
Okay. I know, so when I was in school, I was working on a lot of space-related stuff. I was working on small satellites, and I really wanted to get into space. And something about it just really captivated me. And I knew, looking around, JPL was definitely the coolest place to work because, I mean, they're the only people landing stuff on Mars. They're really the only people doing these deep space missions. And when I came out to interview and I got to see the SFOF, the Spacecraft Flight Operations Facility, yeah, the dark room that you see on TV is just, and you see, oh yeah, we're talking to Saturn right now, and then Voyager is, you know, as far as anything's ever been, and later on we're talking to Mars, and it was just like, oh, this is so cool. Like, there's nowhere else I could go and do that, and I really wanted to. So that's what drew me there.
I mean, so you heard a little bit, like I love Legos. I love Star Trek as well. I think ultimately the defining moment, I think that made, I mean, I liked sciences and engineering as a whole. I think the defining moment for me was I was graduating high school when we did this 1997 Pathfinder mission to Mars. This is the first time since I was, exception of being extremely young, the first time since I was really, able to comprehend things. Of seeing pictures from another planet, seeing, this, even those, honestly, like not much bigger than the RC cars that I was playing with, size rover on the surface of Mars. And there's still something incredibly emotionally powerful for me about seeing just the fact that humans built something, and even if it's just a wheel or a leg or an arm or you name it, this appendage on the surface of a different planet, that just, somehow it does things to my heart that I don't think a lot of other things can do. When I saw that, I was like, this is the the place I want to be. And I was very lucky that ultimately I actually got to do the very thing that I wanted to do.
For me in high school, I was good at math, and I was actually going to go in to be an accountant. And my calculus teacher was like, you should be an engineer. So I'm like, okay, I'll look at that. And went to college, and then I'm like trying to decide what I want to do. And I didn't want to just design one tiny part and one tiny thing for 40 years and just tweak that part. So I want to do something different every time. And this is basically the only place you can do something like that. Because most of the days aren't like landing night. Most of the days you're sitting in front of a computer, looking at your screen, running a simulation, doing something that's the hard work. That's where all the legwork comes in. And landing nights are the big payoff. But it's basically making the day-to-day more enjoyable for the long-term payoff. And that's part of what got me involved. In the back there?
Yeah, so I know on an R&D side of things, math is always getting more efficient in the way you go about things. Is there any way you can send like firmware or software updates? Like, do you have communication with it on the way there, or is it just great?
When we launched, we didn't have the right by choice. We didn't have the right version of the landing software with the right landing parameters because we still had 9 months to do more testing. We had a version that probably would have worked, and we did that on purpose too. But we had 6 more months to basically upload the final version of flight software, all of flight software, not just for landing, but for the surface load as well.
Yeah, I mean, so we have this launch cert. We had basically, we kind of were taking advantage of the fact that there's 8.5 months to get to Mars. So we can build one version for launch and cruise that would definitely get us to Mars safely, and probably, again, as Fred said, to the surface safely. But since we have extra time, we're going to test a new version that could improve our ability to land on the surface. One of the things we had actually that was really cool was called SEXY, stands for Second Chance. And what it was is the backup computer, actually, this was a new feature that was in the latest version of software. The backup computer could also run in parallel with, we have 2 computers on board, And then if the prime computer should hiccup in any way, the backup computer could have taken over during landing and continued to execute the landing. It wasn't a 100% chance of success, even if it had taken over, but it vastly improved our odds in a few places, so we thought it was worth it. And then even, I think what's interesting, and this is talking about some of the limitations of the hardware, the version of software we landed with wouldn't have really worked for Surface. It was just enough to basically check out that everything had survived landing. And so we couldn't cram it all into the memory of the spacecraft. So what we did was we basically had a separate version that was a Surface software version that gutted all the launch and cruise and landing stuff and focused just on Surface. So once we got over there, about a week after landing, we installed the version of Surface software.
And we're working on a new version right now, actually. Just based on what we've seen on the surface, looking at what's been slowing us down, what problems we run into, and we're doing testing on it now. It's getting ready to be uploaded soon. And there are plans to do even further versions as we go farther to make ourselves more efficient and to be able to do what we do, to make it easier on the operators, that kind of stuff, safer for the vehicle. So it's a continuous update process at this point.
Mario.
I'm also a math teacher, and my question is, with working with schools, for instance, I work at an inner city school for low income, and my students saw the space shuttle fly over us in LA, and I dragged them all outside, 100 students, my small school, and I was like, look, there it is. And I had about 5 students come up to me and be like, how do we get into one of those? And these are girls, I work with all girls who had never, been to the beach, and they live in Los Angeles. They're low income, and they can't see something that big and think that they have that possibility. I was wondering, now that they're excited about that, they watched the Mars rover on TV. They watched, NASA go through, funding up and down. We track that kind of thing. And these girls are like, what do? We want to be a part of this, but their confidence is low and they don't think they can be. Is JPL or NASA working in any way with students and low-income students or students who don't think they have a chance at this, maybe to kind of partner in a way to say, hey, there's a lot of creativity and minds out there. We'd love to have you guys in schools more. It would help get NASA, I know the Obama administration is like schools, and maybe there's a way to boost both math, science, and NASA and JPL. I don't know. I'm just wondering if you guys are working with schools more or have plans to.
Well, one of the unfortunate things is, of course, the budget is changed, and this year has been particularly tough to get out and do outreach stuff. But the good news is I think Congress saw fit to restore a big chunk of that to NASA for the next fiscal year. So we should be kind of hopefully back in full force with our education and outreach office. I know that on the MSL we have our own outreach funding as well. We try to do stuff like that, get people into schools. The astronauts come visit schools and things like that. I'm not super familiar with all the educational directives that we have. I know JPL has its own also educational department sometimes that does stuff, and they have kits they can send to teachers and things like that. And of course, people can, if you live in LA, we can come for tours. Our outreach office always gives tours. They give 2 tours a day. A lot of them are to classrooms. So.
And a lot of the engineers go to schools and just give talks on their own because they like to talk about this stuff. It's exciting. You guys help get us excited about what we're doing too. And all that's done mostly on a volunteer basis anyway, because all the outreach money is gone. So it's just done because the engineers like to do it. So if you just call JPL's outreach office, they can get someone to your school.
I will.
Yeah. There you go.
Politics and confidentiality, of course, being what it is. To the extent, how closely are you all working with private space exploration, like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and all that?
So NASA as a whole is definitely working with those. One of our big initiatives is called Commercial Crew. And the idea is that with the absence of the shuttle program, and strategically, shuttle was costing us a lot of money to put people in space. It's kind of it's overly, has overability, I guess. I can't think of the right word. But it's basically too much for what we normally need to just get people into the space station. So when we ended the space shuttle program so we could save money to put towards basically our next launch vehicle system. And so part of that was with the rise of commercial industry in space, particularly of late with SpaceX, Orbital, Virgin Galactic, and things like that, we are going to try to take advantage of those guys. If Virgin Galactic can, put people in space for $200,000, why not? Why can't we just put an astronaut on board and have them dock with the space station and save ourselves all a lot of money? They're going to do it a lot more often than we are, right? I mean, they're going to send hopefully hundreds of people to space every year, if not more. So if we can take advantage of that, that's great. It saves us money. Commercial industry takes off. They get a little extra money from NASA to help develop some of these things. So that's one of the things we're doing. We fund SpaceX and we fund Orbital. And then that allows us to kind of focus on what I think NASA really does best, which is not to just keep doing the same thing, but really, as Fred said, to keep doing new things and allow commercial industry to kind of take over those things once we've established them. And again, I mean, the idea that even 50 years ago that people could just we're going to be able to routinely fly to space for, I mean, $200,000 is not cheap, but it's getting lower and lower basically. That's crazy. And so I think NASA's going to do this SLS, doing the Orion crew capsule, which will allow us. The shuttle was rated for a couple weeks. SLS will allow us to go for like about a month before we have to come back, so they can do moon missions with that. They can go to an asteroid with that possibly, and things like that. So it allows us to focus on the right things, and then commercial industry to take up the stuff that they can actually turn a profit on. And there's not only the companies with the commercial crew, but also like Planetary Resources and companies like that, which they're actually talking about, can we mine asteroids? Why keep digging up our own planet for precious resources when they're just floating out there in space, and all we have to do is grab them? Not Armageddon style. We will not crash them. But they, the idea is that these guys have precious minerals. All the batteries that we're going to use, all these different things. If they're there, and we can avoid damaging our own planet, let's do that. So these are concepts that weren't even on the table 10 years ago. I mean, they were just far out ideas, and now they're becoming economically viable. In part because NASA's allowed that that technological frontier to be passed, and now companies can kind of take advantage of what we do. And we license a lot of our stuff. We really try to encourage that, and not only in those obvious space ways, but instruments, for example, one of our instruments is called it's chemistry and mineralogy. It allows us to do some pretty complex analysis of what a sample is made up of, and now we've turned that into basically a portable suitcase that they can test old artifacts, like Indiana Jones style. We can actually tell, date them. We can see little information about what they contain, but also we can use it, and hopefully less recreational ways, but to test for MDMA and drugs like that, on site without actually having to damage the actual source material. So these are commercial technologies that are coming out of NASA too. So it's kind of we're all taking advantage of each other, and hopefully everybody wins. The rising tide, floats all ships.
In the green shirt, teal.
Hi. You talked about how there's a backup computer. What other type of redundancy systems did you build into Rover?
Okay, I can talk specifically about Pyrotechnics. All the initiators themselves have a redundant pair. The entire system is redundant cross-strap, meaning that if one segment of it fails, you can still be redundant down the line. For the most part, most things on MSL there are two of, and we can electively swap between the two. There are some exceptions, like the RTG, which is the power source, the nuclear power source, and I can't think, the parachute. That was
the arm.
The arm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for the most part, most of the electronics, there's two of everything. We can just swap if we software's intelligent enough to look and see if something is wrong with a piece of hardware to swap automatically for the most part. So because a lot of times, especially on the surface, when we have basically 12 hours between when we get data and when we start sending commands back up, it needs to be able to react on its own. And one interesting thing I was talking to someone about when we were doing cruise, when we started out in cruise, when we just launched, the round trip light time, when you send a signal, the rover receives it, sends data back, was a couple seconds. As it got later, it was upwards of 20 minutes round trip. And so there's a whole class of failures that you really can't even worry, you can't even do anything about, man. You can't, if something is gonna happen and I need to press a button in 2 minutes, it's impossible. It's laws of physics impossible, right? So you have to trust the software and the hardware on board to handle those errors themselves. And after a while, you start to get comfortable with that. And that's kind kind of an interesting part of it that not a lot of people realize is that we're not sitting there with a button to fix something. It really needs to handle itself.
Or joysticks to drive. There's nobody sitting there with a video game controller that's
We have a
driving the
fake one
rover.
to fake people out. Let them think they're having an impact.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you had any advice for a person that wants to apply to JPL there.
Well, yeah. There's a couple things. I'm afraid. Go ahead. Yeah.
At the JPL website, you can submit your resume there, and they're taking applications.
If you're younger, like high school or college age, our internship program is pretty outstanding. They really do a great job of bringing people on board. And, honestly, if they just don't screw it up, we usually offer them jobs.
And they...
It's not because they're terrible. It's because, already at the point, they've demonstrated that they want to be a part of this.
Yeah, and for example, this year and last year, two different students were from the high school robotics team that we were involved with were able to get summer internships. And basically, while they were in 11th grade when they were doing those, so they get to work. One of them got to work on the LDSD, future Mars low density supersonic decelerator. So
you
something
saw our
pretty
heat
cool
shield.
for an 11th grader.
And that's actually and one of the other points. There was one guy, I don't know if you guys remember this. There was a guy who celebrated a little too early in the landing room. Premature celebration guy. It is not because of a failed NASA experiment that he experiences the world 3 seconds before everybody else. It is, in fact, so he was listening to certain things. He heard certain call signs that we all were listening for, but we were instructed not to react until all of the signals were complete. He was in First Robotics.
And I was his mentor 15 years ago when he was in that high school robotics team.
Yeah.
We saw that he was basically a bright kid, and we say, well, maybe we should get him here for a summer job. He finished Berkeley in 3 years. He went on to come and worked at JPL for one of those summers, did a co-op, came back,
and was a critical part of that whole landing thing and the avionics and all the testing that we did. So that's just an example of that's the easiest way, of course, is to start early. But otherwise, JPL is, we are very much, in the place where we're trying to hire fresh blood. We know things like this, it requires new thoughts, new ideas, not just, not just the status quo.
Yes, on the end.
So with all the AIs now, you see in commercial products like Rumba and stuff, is there AI on board of the robotics, and do they learn as it goes? Or?
During the cruise or the actual robot? The surface mission of the rover?
Yeah, surface missions.
So a couple of things. We have really kind of what Rob was alluding to, is the fact that there's so much time between when we see something wrong and the time we could send a command back and even get confirmation of a command. It takes so long. So the rover has a decent, but not incredible level of what we call fault protection. And that's basically the rover protecting itself. We've given it a number of scenarios, and it basically will protect itself in those scenarios and call Earth and basically try to request help. It's not super, it doesn't really learn on its own in any way. We don't, but that is something that we're working on, because as we can demonstrate with that, we have 2 computers, for example, things like that. These things are becoming more and more complex. And so having robots that could basically from the ground level, kind of do self-awareness essentially and be like, oh, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Instead of having to program every scenario where something could go wrong and we have to think about it here, if we can give them enough intelligence to do that on our own, that's definitely the future of where we want to go.
And most of what's built in is don't break yourself. If we said drive here or go off the edge of this cliff, it can sense a little bit that says, well, this is in the way, we might have to go around it, and it just stops. It says, I think I can't go any further, and it declares a fault, and then when they get telemetry down later, they can decide, okay, what happened? Was there a real fault, or did it mistake something in the picture? But yeah, it's pretty
don't shoot
limited.
the arm with the laser. That's a fun.
Yeah, don't shoot ourselves with a laser.
And there is some capability that we're working on testing out and getting going now for, they call it AutoNav. And I'm not the expert on it, but I can talk a little, is the ability to avoid obstacles where we can set a goal for a drive, and it can actually figure out its own way around the rocks and depressions. And
How many of you guys played that, Apple, okay, I'm going to date myself, an Apple IIgs game, it was called Logo. You remember there's this little turtle, and you'd be like, go forward 300, turn right 30. we drive essentially like that for the most part right now. And so we take a picture, we're like, yeah, that looks safe, drive, do this little thing. We're working on the technology essentially in this called AutoNav, as Rob said, and that will allow us to do a couple things. One, it will allow us to be like, I just want you to go to that beam over there. And so, the rover will be like, okay, there's a wheel on my way, I'm gonna drive around this, and there's a cliff, so I'll go down some stairs over here, and it wouldn't do
One of the difficulties with that is we have a motto, basically, test like you fly and fly like you test. For all the things we do, we basically want to test it as close to the exact environment and scenario that we can here, like it's going to experience there. We can't recreate that particular environment. We can't exactly recreate from the pictures the 40 or 100 meter landscape that we're going to try and drive over. So you have to basically develop something that's smart enough to do what you want to do in something that it's never seen before through some other analog of testing that you've done here. And it's
Don't you dare, sir.
That's a huge leap. That's a huge leap of faith that you're putting in, the minds of this computer. So.
Oh, so before he comes in and ruins the party, and kills, Fred, I feel like you're holding something that you want to tell us about, something for critical events.
One of the things that JP has a history of is the Lucky Peanuts. It's a story that back from the 1960s when all of the Ranger missions were failing and failing.
Rangers 1 through 6.
We're trying to get to the moon and they were just having trouble. One day when they had their failure, one of the engineers joked, it must have been the peanuts that engineer so-and-so was eating. And so from that point on, at all the critical events, they cracked open the Lucky Peanuts, whether it was a launch or future landings or orbit insertions to different planets. And which is a contradictory to engineers, which are all about logic and reason, but we're not going to tempt the fates. So it was just a long history. So for all the critical events, including Curiosity landing night, we basically had the Lucky Peanuts.
I pulled out 79 peanuts for 79 pyros, and I felt sick.
Everyone has to do their part.
We have time for one more question.
Who's got the best question?
Oh, do I get to do I get to pick? Can I go to Mars?
Get in line.
I know. Seriously. No, so one more. Who has already asked a question? I almost said ordered a question. Or rather, who wants to ask a question right now? Have these guys already asked a question? Have you asked a
I
question?
don't think any of these have.
You have a flight suit on, so I feel like you should probably ask a question. Friggin' Maverick over here.
So I don't know if you guys have heard about Mars One. It's a private space company that says that they're going to put 4 people on the surface of Mars by 2032, I think. Do you think that's feasible at all? Possible? Too far-fetched? What's your opinion?
I don't know the details about them specifically, but technology-wise, it's possible. I mean, it's a question of money and the directed effort from a lot of people.
So just a really quick background. Mars One, Dutch company, they want to do a reality TV show to fund most of their mission, and it's a one-way trip to Mars. They basically said, we're going to put people on Mars, but you're going to be there for the rest of your life. 4 to 8 people. So, I mean, honestly, if resources were not an issue, I think the technology exists today to put people on the surface of Mars and to live there.
And Fred might correct me if I'm wrong, but the Curiosity landing, the rover touched down going about 1.5 meters per second.
0.75 meters per second.
I got it. Yeah,
twice as fast. Yeah.
But if you had been, if you'd been in the rover and you'd had air, that landing would have been okay for you. You would have been all right, if you're healthy. Yeah.
So as far as an opinion, no, this is not an official statement by NASA. No, I think, one, we're all really excited. I mean, really, anything that, when people are excited about getting to Mars or exploring space, it's awesome for all of us. But, it's going to have a lot of challenges, again, without seeing all the details and technology. But they there's some very smart people involved in that project. They obviously, have done their homework, and I think it's certainly possible. And, I would be excited to see that. It's not the way NASA would approach a mission, because we almost certainly would want to bring people back. And that's really difficult. To give you an example, not including the rocket that sent everything to Mars, we had a 4-to-1 ratio, basically, of what we took out of Earth orbit to what we put onto the surface. And now you have to bring all that stuff back if you want to bring humans back from Mars. So if it's a one-way trip, great, you do the 4-to-1 ratio, you lose a lot of basically stuff coming down, that's fine. But if you want to bring people back, it's very challenging because now you have to carry all the stuff that you need to bring for the return trip. And so there's all these fancy architectures, these kind of waypoints with little like supplies that you can pick up along the way on the way back, kind of like the trapper stations, like fur trappers would use back in Canada in the day. Stuff in orbit around Mars. So I think I'm optimistic. I would love to see somebody get. I mean, I feel like definitely in our lifetimes we will see people on the surface of Mars, and I think that's great.
Are you saying there will also be intergalactic fur trappers? We will have that?
Only if it's a euphemism for something.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Bobak and Rob and Fred. Give them your love. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you so much. Take some pictures. Put the mics down. Oh, yeah.
A couple things.
And I'm owed one thermal battery.
Yeah, one thermal battery. There's some peanuts in the back here and stickers and things like that, so you guys should grab some of those things. Yeah.
Pose for the people so they can take your picture. The faces of NASA and JPL, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely. Right this way. Give it up, give it up, give it up. Was that fun? I was enthralled. Could you not see me over there? I couldn't, I'm so sorry I had to leave. I had to go do other things that people do at Comic-Con. Thank you guys so much, honestly. That was actually kind of our trial run. Oh yeah, you'll be ushered out of your rows one by one, I think. Oh, that's right, the volunteers told me. So guys, we're actually gonna be exiting that way. When you come down, you're gonna go out that way, and we're gonna filter you through. We have another panel that's queuing up in the Palm area, so you're going to filter through the concourse and Nerd HQ. And that's not just tactically so I can sell more merch. Trust me, that is not, it's really not. Although if you want to buy a shirt, please do. But that was actually our first, if anybody who's been in Nerd HQ before, that was our first non-entertainment panel. We really, yeah. Yeah. That's something that we've always really wanted to do, and you guys, your support here today makes us believe that we can keep doing that stuff, because really, Nerd HQ was always about the arts, but also science and video games, technology. So if you guys want those things, then spread the word, tell more people, and make sure that you tweet to all of your favorite people in those worlds. I'm totally serious, by the way. From here on out, make sure that you bug the crap out of your favorite celebrities, whether they be on screen or working at JPL, and say, hey, we want to talk to you at Nerd HQ. That's how we will be able to get these kinds of panels for you. Sound good? Awesome. Oh, yes, what? That's their battery? Oh, that's JPL's battery. Oh. I'm like, I don't know what you're trying to tell me right now. Oh, did this get handed around the audience? Oh, see, I love hands-on stuff. Did you guys get to pick up the tire? No. Watch me go. It's so light. It's so light. Oh, Joe. Oh, what's in the box? Oh, what's in the box? Did they really not open the box this whole time? Oh, my God. You don't want to. It's Gwyneth Paltrow's head. It's actually a little mini rover. Look at that. And it's mine. All right, you guys got to get out of here. We have a Maze Runner panel. That's happening right now. I love you. Stay in your seat. Leave, but stay. Wait, what's happening? Oh, row by row. So talk amongst yourselves. And thank you so much for coming to the show, by the way. That meant it. And if anybody finds yourself in New York, come to First Date. It's a romp of a show. It's basically Chuck the Musical if you ever wanted to see it. That's basically what it is. Maybe. Later.